3 excavators rolled through my north gate at 6:12 a.m., dragging red survey flags across my ranch like a wound. The Willow Creek HOA had granted a $9 million pipeline easement straight through my cattle pasture, my spring-fed pond, and the gravel access road I owned end to end. By the time I reached the fence line, the crew had already marked a trench wide enough to split the whole valley. That pipeline would not just cross my land. It would feed 400 new luxury homes waiting behind the ridge. What they had not checked was the locked control gate tied to the county water corridor easement under my name. The foreman climbed down first, boots sinking into wet grass. Diesel smoke rolled over the pasture. His clipboard snapped in the wind. "Mr. Walker, we're authorized to begin clearing." Behind him, a yellow bulldozer lowered its blade toward my cedar fence. That was their first real mistake. They thought permission from an HOA meant permission from the land itself. I stood in the tire tracks with coffee still burning my tongue and looked at the red line cutting toward my grandfather's pond. The water was calm. The cows were not. They bunched near the far fence, snorting at the engine noise, their breath white in the cold morning air. My name is Ethan Walker. I run 2,800 acres of ranchland outside Kerrville, Texas. I fix my own gates, pull my own calves, and keep every deed, survey, and maintenance receipt in a fireproof cabinet because my grandfather taught me that paper lasts longer than promises. But that morning, paper was exactly what they waved in my face. The foreman handed me a laminated site plan with Willow Creek Estates printed across the top. My ranch was shaded gray, like it was already theirs to cut open. A blue pipeline route sliced from the subdivision boundary to the county service road. There were stamps. Initials. A dollar amount. $9 million, bold and clean, like money could smooth over barbed wire and bloodlines. Then Victoria Ashford arrived in a white Range Rover that had never seen mud before. She stepped out wearing cream slacks, gold sunglasses, and the kind of smile people use when they think the room already belongs to them. "Ethan," she said like we were old friends. "This doesn't need to become dramatic." The bulldozer idled behind her. Its blade hummed against the dirt. "Your board approved work on my ranch?" I asked. She tilted her head. "The easement was granted through proper channels." I looked past her at the crew unloading orange cones beside my private road. One man was already photographing my gate keypad. Another was measuring the culvert that carried runoff into the pond. That detail stayed with me. Nobody measures a culvert unless they plan to control the water moving through it. Victoria followed my eyes and smiled wider. "Progress makes people uncomfortable." The air went still for half a second. Even the cattle stopped moving. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Daniel Mercer. I told him there were excavators inside my north gate, a pipeline crew on my pasture, and an HOA president claiming she had bought the right to split my ranch in half. He did not raise his voice. Daniel never did. He only asked one question. "Are they near the county water gate?" I looked toward the ridge, where the steel control gate stood locked under a rust-red warning sign. The crew had parked 10 yards from it. "Yes," I said. Daniel went quiet. Then I heard papers moving on his desk. "Do not touch anything," he said. "Keep them talking." Victoria stepped closer, perfume cutting through diesel and wet grass. "You're delaying a public utility improvement." I looked at the red flags, the blade, the pond, and the men waiting for my silence to become consent. This was no longer about a pipeline. Then Daniel told me deputies were already on the way. The crew kept working after I ended the call. That caught my attention immediately. Most contractors slow down when they hear deputies are coming. These men did the opposite. The foreman barked instructions. Surveyors spread farther across the pasture. Orange stakes appeared near the creek that fed my pond. The metallic clink of hammers echoed across the valley. Victoria stood with her arms folded, watching it all like she was unveiling a new shopping center instead of cutting through a working ranch. A cold breeze pushed across the grass. The smell of diesel mixed with cedar and damp soil. I walked toward the county water gate on the ridge. Every few yards I noticed another detail. Fresh paint marks on fence posts. Measurements written directly onto my gravel road. Small flags placed beside drainage channels that had existed longer than most of the houses in Willow Creek estates. Somebody had spent time studying this property. That bothered me more than the machines. A rushed operation leaves mistakes. Preparation means confidence. Confidence usually means somebody thinks they are protected. Halfway up the ridge, I stopped beside an old limestone marker my grandfather installed decades ago. The stone was weathered. Moss covered part of the engraving. I ran my hand across it and looked down at the valley. The entire ranch stretched below me. Rolling pasture. Oak trees. Stock tanks. Windmills turning slowly in the morning light. This place was not just land. It was a system. Water flowed through it. Roads connected it. Gates controlled access. Every piece affected something else. The crew seemed interested in all of it. That realization settled heavily in my chest. Then I noticed a black pickup parked near the county gate. It was not part of the construction convoy. The truck had tinted windows and no company markings. A man stepped out holding a tablet. He was dressed too well for field work. He spent several minutes photographing the gate controls. Then he photographed the warning signs mounted beside them. He never looked at the pasture. He only cared about the infrastructure. That was the second thing that stayed with me. I took a picture of him with my phone. The moment he noticed, he lowered the tablet and walked away. No wave. No explanation. Just gone. Down below, Victoria was speaking with two men in suits. One pointed toward the subdivision beyond the ridge. Another pointed toward my pond. Their body language looked less like construction planning and more like investment planning. That distinction matters. Construction crews build things. Investors expect returns. Suddenly this operation felt much larger than a local HOA project. The rumble of engines continued. A flock of birds lifted from the trees and scattered across the sky. Even the cattle had moved to the far end of the pasture. Animals notice disruption long before people do. My phone buzzed. Daniel again. This time his voice sounded tighter. Ethan, do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. And if anyone asks about the county gate, tell them nothing. I looked back at the steel structure on the ridge. Morning sunlight reflected off the lock housing. The warning sign beneath it seemed brighter than before. Daniel, I said. What exactly are they after? He paused for a second. Papers shuffled somewhere on his desk. Then he answered with 5 words that changed the entire situation. This was never about the pasture. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at the county gate. The wind rattled the metal warning sign. Somewhere below, an air compressor kicked on with a sharp hiss. Daniel rarely spoke in riddles. If he said this was never about the pasture, there was a reason. What are you talking about? I asked. His answer came slowly. I need another 20 minutes before I can prove it. Then the line went quiet. I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked back toward the construction site. The operation seemed larger than before. More trucks had arrived. Men in reflective vests moved equipment toward the ridge instead of the planned trench line. That caught my attention immediately. According to the maps they showed me, the work was supposed to cross open pasture. Instead, several workers were drifting closer to the county gate. One carried surveying equipment. Another was checking measurements near the control box. They were acting like the gate itself mattered. Victoria noticed me watching. She walked up the slope with careful steps, avoiding mud. Her sunglasses reflected the morning sun. You look concerned, she said. You look busy, I replied. She smiled. Development moves fast. The answer sounded rehearsed. Behind her, the black pickup returned. The same man with the tablet stepped out again. This time he was joined by another man in a navy blazer. Neither spoke to the construction crew. Neither touched a shovel. They stood near the ridge studying. Documents. Investors. Consultants. Maybe attorneys. Whatever they were not there to watch dirt move. The smell of fresh diesel drifted across the hill. Below us, a crew member opened a utility access panel near the gate. My jaw tightened. "That area isn't part of your project," I said. Victoria followed my gaze. For the first time all morning, her smile faded slightly. Only slightly. Then it returned. "Everything has been approved." There was that word again. Approved. Nobody kept talking about approval unless they were worried somebody might question it. A county maintenance truck appeared on the road in the distance. It slowed as it approached the ridge. The driver looked at the equipment, looked at the workers, then drove away without stopping. That was unusual. County crews usually checked activity around critical infrastructure. This driver did not even get out. Another detail to remember. I walked down toward the utility panel. One of the workers stepped in front of me. Not aggressively. Just enough to block the path. "Restricted work area, sir." His badge carried the logo of a contractor I had never heard of. I looked past him. The open panel exposed cables, sensors, and communication lines connected to the gate controls. The construction route was now the least interesting thing on the ranch. My phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. Just 3 words. "Check the permit number." I opened the photograph I had taken earlier. The permit information sat near the bottom corner of the site plan. A long string of numbers. Most people would have ignored it. Then I noticed the first 2 letters. They did not match any county permit format I had ever seen. Not even close. I zoomed in again. The number belonged to an entirely different agency. That was when I realized somebody had hidden the real project behind a much bigger one. Then a helicopter appeared over the ridge. A low thumping sound rolled across the valley as the helicopter came over the ridge. Every head on the construction site turned upward. Dust swirled through the morning air. The aircraft circled once above the ranch, then slowed near the county corridor before banking away toward the subdivision. Nobody waved. Nobody looked surprised. That was the part one noticed. The workers acted like they had been expecting it. The man with the tablet immediately stepped away from the ridge and began making calls. Victoria checked her phone. One of the men in suits walked back to the black pickup and pulled out a thick folder. It felt less like a construction project and more like a coordinated operation. I zoomed in on the permit number again. The format still bothered me. County permits did not begin with those letters. Neither did state permits. I sent the photo to Daniel. 30 seconds later my phone rang. "Do not discuss that number with anyone," he said. His voice was calm, but not relaxed. "What is it?" I asked. "I am still confirming." Papers shuffled in the background. Keys clicked. Then silence. "Daniel." He exhaled slowly. "Ethan, the agency code on that permit is tied to regional utility infrastructure." I looked toward the county gate again. Suddenly every measurement near the control box made more sense. Every photograph. Every inspection. Every worker drifting away from the proposed route. "They are not interested in my pasture," I said. "No," Daniel replied. "And I think they know exactly what sits behind that gate." The wind picked up across the ridge. Dry grass rippled in long waves. A construction supervisor shouted instructions below. Another truck arrived carrying equipment cases instead of digging tools. The operation was changing right in front of me. A few minutes later, I walked back toward the main staging area. Victoria intercepted me before I reached it. Her smile looked tighter than before. "You seem very focused on the wrong details." That was an interesting choice of words. Wrong details. Not incorrect. Not irrelevant. Wrong. As if there were details she preferred me not to notice. "What exactly is behind this project?" I asked. She folded her arms. "Community growth." The answer landed with all the weight of an empty cardboard box. Behind her, workers were unloading communication equipment. Not pipeline materials. Communication equipment. Another detail. Another inconsistency. The foreman approached carrying revised site Maps. I noticed something immediately. The route had changed. The new markings curved closer to the county corridor than the original survey line. He spread the map across the hood of a truck. 2 men pointed directly at the gate location. Not the pond. Not the pasture. The gate. The smell of hot engines hung in the air. Somewhere near the creek, a metal panel slammed shut. Then my phone vibrated again. This time it was not Daniel. It was a county employee I had known for years. Greg Turner. We had worked together on drainage access issues during a flood season. Greg rarely called unless something mattered. I answered immediately. "Ethan," he said. "I just saw the project file." I waited. His voice dropped lower. "That permit package should never have been approved." My grip tightened around the phone. Down below, Victoria was laughing with the investors. The workers kept moving equipment toward the ridge. Nobody seemed worried. Greg paused for a second. Then he said something that made the entire situation feel far bigger than an HOA dispute. "There is a signature in that file from someone who retired 3 years ago." The words hung in my ear long after Greg stopped talking. A signature from someone who retired 3 years ago. I turned toward the staging area again. Nothing looked different. The engines still rumbled. Workers still moved equipment. Victoria still smiled for the investors. Yet suddenly the entire scene felt staged. Like a play where somebody had forgotten to remove a prop from an earlier act. "Are you sure?" I asked Greg. "Positive," he replied. I checked twice. Papers rustled on his end of the call. "The approval file was modified recently, but the authorization page contains an official signature that should not exist anymore." My eyes drifted toward the men studying maps near the ridge. They looked confident. Too confident. Most people become cautious when permits involve multiple agencies. These people acted like nobody would ever question them. That confidence was becoming its own clue. Greg lowered his voice. "Ethan, there is another problem." I waited. "Several supporting documents were uploaded within the last month, but the timestamps do not match the review records." The breeze pushed across the hill again. Dust lifted from the road. Somewhere below, a backup alarm chirped repeatedly as another truck reversed into position. Every sound seemed sharper now. Every movement carried more weight. "Can you send me copies?" I asked. "Not yet. I need to be careful." That answer told me everything. Greg was worried. County employees do not worry over routine paperwork. We ended the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started walking toward the ridge. Nobody stopped me this time. The worker who had blocked my path earlier was gone. The utility panel remained open. Inside, rows of equipment blinked quietly beneath the morning sun. Small indicator lights. Communication modules. Monitoring systems. Nothing about it looked connected to residential development. I crouched beside the panel. A maintenance label caught my eye. The county corridor was linked to a regional distribution network. Not local. Regional. That changed the scale entirely. This was no longer about one subdivision. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel Mercer had arrived. His dark pickup rolled to a stop near the gate. He climbed out carrying a thick binder under one arm. No briefcase. No suit jacket. Just work boots and a legal file that looked heavier than it should have. That alone told me he came prepared. Daniel walked straight to the utility panel. He studied it for several seconds. Then he looked toward the workers. "They are getting bolder." "You figured something out?" I asked. He opened the binder. Inside were printed permits, correspondence records, agency filings, and photographs. Hundreds of pages. Tabs stuck out from every side. Daniel flipped through them quickly. I figured out why they rushed this. Victoria noticed him almost immediately. Her smile disappeared for the first time all day. She began walking toward us. The investors followed. So did the foreman. One by one, the people directing the project started gathering near the ridge. Nobody wanted to be anywhere else. Daniel handed me a single document. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then I saw the highlighted section near the bottom. A name. An approval authority. And a department that had nothing to do with housing developments. I looked back at Daniel. He nodded once. Now we know what they were really trying to reach. Then Victoria asked the one question she clearly did not want answered. Victoria stopped a few feet from us. The wind tugged at her hair as she looked from Daniel to the binder in his hands. The construction noise continued behind her, but several workers had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the investors were watching now. What exactly do you think you found? She asked. Her voice stayed calm, but the confidence from earlier had thinned around the edges. Daniel did not answer immediately. He flipped to another tab inside the binder and handed me a second document. I scanned the page. Agency references. Infrastructure maps. Corridor designations. None of it mentioned residential development. None of it mentioned neighborhood expansion. My eyes stopped on a highlighted section near the bottom. The county corridor connected to a regional emergency distribution network. Not a housing utility line. Not a local service route. A regional network. The scale of it hit me all at once. Victoria folded her arms. You are making this far more complicated than it needs to be. Daniel finally looked at her. Actually, somebody else already did that. The foreman shifted uncomfortably. One of the investors checked his phone. Another stepped back from the group. Small movements. Tiny cracks. But they were there. Daniel opened another section of the binder. The pages fluttered in the breeze. The approval package references infrastructure authority that your board does not possess. Victoria's expression remained controlled. Our attorneys reviewed everything. Then your attorneys should be very interested in this file. Daniel tapped a highlighted paragraph. I leaned closer. The smell of dust and hot machinery drifted across the ridge. Somewhere behind us, a truck door slammed shut. The paragraph referenced access limitations tied directly to the county corridor. Any modification near the control system required additional authorization. Authorization that did not appear anywhere in the project package. Victoria glanced toward the black pickup. The man with the tablet immediately looked away. That reaction told me more than any document could. Daniel noticed it too. Interesting, he said quietly. For the first time all morning, nobody had a quick answer. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Then Victoria smiled again. It looked forced this time. You are still not stopping anything today. Daniel closed the binder. That depends. Her jaw tightened slightly. On what? On what arrives before noon? The investors exchanged glances. I saw it happen. Quick. Subtle. Concern replacing certainty. One of them pulled out a phone and walked several yards away before making a call. Another began reviewing documents from a leather folder. The atmosphere had changed. Nobody was celebrating anymore. They were calculating. I stepped closer to Daniel. What are we waiting for? I asked. He kept his eyes on the group. Confirmation. From who? He hesitated. That alone got my attention. Daniel was not a man who hesitated often. The helicopter returned in the distance. Its faint thumping echoed across the valley. Several heads turned toward the sound. Daniel finally answered. The one department nobody expected to review this. I followed his gaze toward the county road beyond the ridge. Heat shimmered above the pavement. The morning sun climbed higher. Then I noticed a convoy of vehicles turning off the highway and heading directly toward the ranch. The convoy moved fast. 3 county vehicles led the way. 2 unmarked trucks followed behind them. Dust trailed across the road like smoke. Every conversation on the ridge seemed to stop at once. The foreman lowered his clipboard. The investors stopped checking their phones. Even Victoria turned away from Daniel and focused on the approaching vehicles. The engines from the construction equipment still hummed in the background, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The confidence that had carried them all morning was starting to crack. The first county vehicle rolled through my gate and stopped near the utility corridor. Doors opened. 4 officials stepped out carrying folders and tablets. None of them looked interested in the construction site itself. Their eyes went straight to the county control gate. Straight to the utility panel. Straight to the corridor maps. Daniel watched quietly beside me. "They came faster than I expected," he said. One official approached the group near the ridge. He introduced himself. Then he immediately requested project authorization records. Not permits. Not construction plans. Authorization records. That distinction caught everyone's attention. Victoria recovered first. She stepped forward with her usual polished smile. "We have full approval documentation available." The official nodded politely. "That is exactly what we are here to review." Behind him, another inspector began photographing the control systems. A third walked directly to the utility panel. None of them seemed impressed by the investors or the construction company representatives. They looked focused. Methodical. The way experienced auditors look when they already know where to search. A gust of wind rattled the metal gate. The helicopter circled once more in the distance. Nobody seemed interested in it anymore. The real action was happening on the ground. Victoria handed over a folder. The lead official flipped through several pages. Then he stopped. His eyes settled on one document longer than the others. He read it twice. That tiny pause sent a ripple through the entire group. The investors noticed it. The foreman noticed it. Daniel noticed it. So did I. Small moments matter when people are trying to hide uncertainty. The official turned to another member of his team. They exchanged a few quiet words. Then a tablet appeared. Records were compared. Dates were checked. More pages were reviewed. The process felt painfully slow. Yet every minute seemed to drain more confidence from the people who had arrived expecting an easy victory. One investor walked back to his vehicle and remained there. Another started making calls. Victoria kept her posture steady, but she had stopped smiling entirely. The smell of hot engines mixed with dry grass under the midday sun. Sweat rolled down the side of my neck. Nobody was digging anymore. Every machine sat idle. Every worker waited. Then the lead official looked up from the paperwork and asked a single question. It was not directed at me. It was not directed at Daniel. It was directed at Victoria. "Can you explain why this authorization references an agency that never reviewed your application?" The silence that followed felt heavier than the Texas heat. Then someone opened a second file. The second file landed on the hood of a county vehicle with a dull thud. Every eye on the ridge followed it. The lead official opened the folder slowly. Pages turned in the wind. A few were marked with bright tabs. Others carried handwritten notes. Victoria tried to speak, but the official raised a hand. Not rude. Just firm. For the first time all day, she stopped talking. The construction site felt frozen. Engines idled. Workers stood beside equipment. Nobody touched a shovel. Nobody touched a control panel. The lead official compared the new file against the authorization package. Then he compared it again. One inspector moved beside him with a tablet. Another opened a digital archive. The smell of hot metal drifted across the ridge. Somewhere near the pond, a gate chain rattled in the breeze. Daniel stood beside me without saying a word. He did not need to. The expressions around us were telling the story. The investors looked uncomfortable now. One removed his sunglasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Another kept checking messages that were clearly not making him feel better. Victoria remained still. Too still. The confidence she had worn all morning was gone. Then the lead official found something. His finger stopped on a single page. He looked at the date. Looked at the signature. Then looked at the authorization code. The same code I had photographed earlier. The one that did not belong where it appeared. He handed the page to another reviewer. The second reviewer frowned immediately. That reaction traveled through the group faster than any announcement could. Quiet conversation started. Phones came out. More documents appeared. The black pickup's occupants stopped pretending they were observers. They gathered near the investors and began reviewing paperwork of their own. Nobody was talking about development anymore. Nobody was talking about community growth. Every conversation had shifted toward records, approvals, and responsibility. The lead official finally closed the file. He turned toward Victoria. "This review cannot continue under the current authorization package." The words hit harder than any argument. The foreman looked toward his equipment. Several workers exchanged glances. One began collecting survey flags. Another closed the utility panel and locked it. Small actions. Important actions. Daniel exhaled slowly beside me. "There it is," he said. Victoria stepped forward. "There has to be some misunderstanding." The official remained calm. "That is exactly what we intend to determine." Another county vehicle arrived near the road. More personnel stepped out carrying document cases. Not construction inspectors. Records specialists. That detail caught my attention immediately. They were no longer evaluating the project. They were evaluating the paperwork behind it. The difference mattered. Clouds drifted across the afternoon sun. Shadows stretched over the pasture. My cattle had begun moving back toward the pond. Even they seemed to sense the noise was fading. Then Greg Turner pulled into the ranch. He climbed out holding a sealed envelope. His expression told me he had found something important. He walked straight past Victoria. Straight past the investors. Straight to the lead official. The envelope changed hands. The seal was broken. The first page came out. And the color drained from two faces at once. The page from Greg's envelope moved through 3 different hands before anyone spoke. The lead official read it first. Then the records specialist. Then another reviewer from the conva. Each reaction looked almost identical. Eyes narrowed. Pages flipped back. Dates checked again. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked confused. They looked certain. That was the difference. Victoria noticed it too. Her posture changed. The investors noticed it. The foreman noticed it. The entire ridge seemed to hold its breath. The afternoon wind rolled. Across the pasture. Grass swayed around the survey stakes. Most of the equipment had already gone silent. The lead official finally lowered the document. "This confirms the discrepancy." His voice carried across the group. No shouting. No drama. Just certainty. Sometimes that is more powerful. Victoria stepped forward. "What discrepancy?" The official opened the page again. "The authorization referenced in your package was never active." Silence followed. The words landed like a gate slamming shut. One investor removed his glasses and stared at the ground. Another quietly folded his folder closed. The foreman walked toward his crew and began speaking into a radio. Workers started collecting equipment. Nobody had ordered them to leave yet. They simply understood where this was heading. Daniel stood beside me with his hands in his pockets. Calm as ever. "That was the missing piece," he said. I looked at the county corridor stretching across the ridge. The steel gate stood exactly where it had stood all morning. Unmoved. Untouched. The same gate everyone suddenly seemed desperate to avoid discussing. The lead official continued reviewing the file. "There are multiple inconsistencies requiring formal investigation." Victoria tried again. "This project has substantial financial backing." The official nodded. "That does not change the records." Another county representative approached carrying a printed notice. It was handed directly to the project supervisor. He read it once. Then twice. His shoulders dropped slightly. The notice was simple. All activity connected to the authorization package was suspended pending review. Just like that. Months of planning stopped on a single sheet of paper. The smell of diesel slowly faded as engines shut down one after another. Trucks began turning around. Survey crews packed equipment cases. Orange flags disappeared from my pasture. The utility panel was sealed. The corridor gate remained locked. Exactly as it should be. Greg eventually walked over and joined us. He looked exhausted. "You were right to question the permit number," he said. Daniel laughed softly. "Ethan was right to question everything." The sun hung low above the hills now. Long shadows stretched across the ranch. My cattle drifted back toward the pond. The valley felt quieter with every passing minute. Victoria stood near her vehicle speaking into a phone. Her voice stayed low. The investors were already leaving. Nobody celebrated. Nobody argued. They simply left. That told me more than any speech ever could. The project had depended on momentum. On assumptions. On people not looking too closely. Once the records were examined, the entire thing unraveled on its own. I watched the final construction truck disappear beyond the ridge. The dust slowly settled back onto the road. Daniel closed his binder. Greg tucked the envelope under his arm. The county officials continued documenting the site. As for me, I stood beside the gate my grandfather once told me to protect and looked across the land that was still mine. Justice is not loud. It arrives line by line, signature by signature, until there is nowhere left to hide.